Good morning to all of you. Welcome to this second cycle of our international seminar, Venezuela in Struggles, Colonial Past, Revolutionary Legacy, and Communitary Regeneration. This seminar started in 2020, and we had already 10 sessions. It has been a special seminar because it has had stories told by the protagonists of the Bolivarian Revolution, communals, militants, students of the Bolivarian Venezuela. This seminar was an initiative of the Sustainability Global University, the Simon Bolivar Institute for Peace and Solidarity Among the Peoples, for the continental platform ALBA Movimientos, with also ARENA, which is the Regional Association of Asia, and Green Ground Ecotech, with the support of ALBA TV, who has played a key role for the dissemination of the seminar over the last sessions. I am Hernan Vargas. I am part of the ALBA Movimientos movement, a militant of the Pobladores movement. And today we will start this activity. We are very happy to be here. This is the first meeting of the year, and we are going to address important topics by the Minister of Planning of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, Ricardo Menéndez. But before that, we are going to have a first round for the setting up of this seminar. This seminar in 2020 started with Reinaldo Iturriza. He is a sociologist. He has been the Minister of the Communes and Culture, and he started with a presentation of the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela, the construction of Chavism, and then we talked about all the communes in Venezuela. We started with the Maizal commune, and also with the Che Guevara commune of the Merida state, which are rural communes. Then in the third meeting, we learned about the revolutionary trend Zamora, and we talked about the establishment of communes. And then we had a look of the self-governance in the cities with the participation of the Pobladores movement, the Otro Beta movement, and several urban communes. Then we learned about how communes are working in the eastern part of our country. We played a video document called Communes in Venezuela, which illustrates the experience of communes in the eastern part of the country. And then we learned about the popular movement in Venezuela. The sixth meeting was focused on the feminist agenda. We knew about different experiences of the feminist movement, like the fifth wave, the bicentennial women front, breaking the rule. And after that, we also talked about the communitary media and alternative media, which are a very important expression in the recent times. We had the opportunity to share with ALBA TV and other collectives. And we also shared with the National Association of Community Media, ANCLA. And also we had a look at how from the mass media we are carrying out social struggles. And then we talked about the construction process of the elections, how the electoral system works in Venezuela, and we had the opportunity to share with authorities of the national electoral system in Venezuela just before the 6th December elections in Venezuela to know more about how the CNE works. And in the last session of 2020, we dwelled upon the popular economies in Venezuela. We had the opportunity to look at the recovery process of different companies that are under the rule of the working class, and also how the farming processes taken place thanks to the cooperative networks that has been established. And we also had the opportunity to know more the hydroecological center in the eastern part of our country. And in 2020, we closed with the role of the Bolivarian revolution and the recovery process. We had the opportunity to look at the policies in order to create a multipolar world, a multicentric world by the Simon Bolivar Institute for Peace. And we also talked about the International Assembly of the Peoples as a space where we can be incorporated, and also ALBA is a project that is being built with the ALBA member countries, and it's a main platform for our endeavors. So this is what we dwelt upon in 2020, and now we are starting the second phase of this seminar. Today, we are going to look at the achievements of the revolution, and the forthcoming meetings are going to look in detail the process of all the sanctions that are coercive unilateral measures against the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, against the Venezuelan people. Then we will look at the historic fights and struggles that we have had in Venezuela with Professor Duque, and then we will see the communal construction towards socialism with Iraida Vargas and Mario Sanoja, and we will also have a look at the Venezuelan economy in the recent times of the revolution and the current juncture under the blockade by Professor Jose Felix Rivas Alvarado. So this is what we will do in the next sessions, just to have an overlook of what we are going to do. All the sessions are available in our YouTube channel. You can go and check there for the previous meetings. And in this year, we will continue broadcasting. We invite you to join in through this Zoom platform, but now we are streaming on Facebook, and YouTube, and ALBA TV, and also our friends from China who are broadcasting through streaming. And you will have available all the sessions in the portal of the Global University for Sustainability. Now I will give the floor to the speakers. We're going to start this meeting with Chinchi Lao. She is a professor of the Cultural Development University, and she's the main coordinator of the Global University for Sustainability. Chinchi, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Hernan. I would like to be representing the Global University for Sustainability and the Lingnan University to welcome you all to this series second of the Venezuelan lectures. Hernan just gave you an idea of what we covered in the first series. So we have heard from the rural communes, the urban communes, and we also had been meeting a lot of grassroots activists and economists and intellectuals in the first series. And we learned how under the imperialist offensive, the people of Venezuela have been having all these advances, which are most difficult, but also most necessary. And through these practices, there have been the theorizing of how we could be managing and caring for the commons. When we started the first series, some of us who went to Venezuela in January last year wrote an article and published it in one of the newspapers in China. And we had an online audience, online readership of over 500,000. So we started that series, and on the Zoom, we have had over 600 people registered. But then in the live streaming of the whole series, we have had between 2,000 and 6,500 in the audience. And although the lectures lasted until midnight in China, we still had roughly about still 2,000 people listening to the lectures. So I would like to thank you all for joining us again now for this second series. And in this series, we would go deeper into systematic analysis, and also we would try to crystallize the Venezuelan experience, which is important not only for the Venezuelan people, but also for the global South and for the whole of humanity. And today we are very happy that Mr. Ricardo Menendez Prieto, sectorial vice president of Venezuela, and also the planning minister, is going to kickstart this series. So on behalf of the Global University and the Lingnan University, I welcome you again to this series, and we thank again the Simón Bolívar Institute and the ALBA Movement Venezuelan chapter for co-organizing this series. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Kinchi. Y justamente entonces ahora le pediríamos a nuestra querida compañera Carmen Navas, directora ejecutiva.
I would like Carmen Navas, the Executive Director for Peace and Solidarity of the Peoples of the Simón Bolívar Institute, so she can address the audience.
Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches a todas, a todos.
Good morning to you all from the Simón Bolívar Institute for Peace and Solidarity among the Peoples. On behalf of the Institute, I would like to say that today we're very pleased to start the second phase of the seminar Venezuela in Struggles. I would like to thank all of those who have been entrusted with the organization of the first part of this seminar, which enable us to break a wall that prevented us from spreading Venezuela's message. Thanks to the effort of the Global University for Sustainability, thanks to ALBA Movimientos, thanks to the Lingnan University and ALBA TV and the Technological Center Green Ground, who have made it all possible. For us, this opportunity helps us to face the challenge that President Chavez proposed in 2001. Venezuela 2021 will be able to give responses to show the achievements of the Bolivarian revolution. I am sure that today, with the minister's presentation of the People's Power for Planning, Ricardo Menendez, and also Deputy President, first Vice President of Venezuela, we will have the opportunity to look at the achievements of the revolution over the last 20 years and what are the challenges to face. Because this year is a milestone year, we are sure that we will be sharing with you all these achievements. I would like to thank Hernan and all of you for the opportunity to address you on behalf of the Simón Bolívar Institute. So welcome, and I wish you all success in this news phase that is starting today. Thank you very much, Carmen. I would like also to ask our friend Jade Chitsue to address the audience. She is a spokesperson of the Asian Association, the Region Asian Association for New Alternatives. Chitsue, you have the floor.
Yeah. Thank you, Hernan. On behalf of Asian Regional Exchange for New Alternatives, we welcome all audience from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. This is an ongoing cooperation not only between China and Venezuela, but also between Asia and also Latin America. And we, apart from the lectures, we plan to publish a book in Spanish, English, and Chinese about these lectures. So we hope we will continue this kind of cooperation and to be a good model between the good cooperation between Asia and Latin America. Welcome again to the second series of Venezuela lecturers. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Yade, por ese saludo. También entonces damos ahora la
Thank you,
palabra.
Jade. So we will now give the floor to Pablo Kunix from ALBA TV movement, who has enabled us to guarantee the holding of this seminar. Thank you. Greetings to all in Venezuela, in China, and in the different countries that are following us and participating in this seminar. For us, it is very important to break the media siege and to be a tool in order to unite with other peoples and unify our integration vision of a global South. So this is what we intend to do in our endeavors, to look at an anti-imperialistic vision of the world. So I'm very pleased to participate in the second phase of the Venezuelan Struggle Seminar, and we will be doing our best to achieve our goal, which is to get closer and to break the media siege upon Venezuela and upon the countries that fight for a fairer world. Thank you, Pablo. So, in order to close with the greetings of the organizers of this seminar, we will give the floor to Hernan Chichon, who is a representative of the Ecotechnological Center Greenland.
非常感谢各位老师、各位嘉宾，很高兴我们终于迎来了委内瑞拉讲座系列之2，也非常感谢上一个讲座为我们带来了相当丰富和深刻的内容还有知识，让我们受益匪浅。整个委内瑞拉讲座系列之1，我们国恩相见的 B 站直播间一直都有几千人在坚持学习。我们这个 B 站直播间也是一个学习的平台也主要是以年轻人为主。大家在听的过程中也发起过很多很有意思的讨论。我觉得这样一个讲座系列意义特别重大特别是对我们中国的青年人，对一些有理想、有抱负、有视野的年轻人。现在的委内瑞拉在美国帝国主义的封锁和狭路尽管遭遇了很多困难，但是他们都在坚持社会主义的理想，一步一步的摸索建立本地化的经济生产，一步一步的探索实现自力更生、独立自主发展的道路。至于我们中国，
I know that China. The series of these lectures could help the Chinese youth to reflect on the history and what is going on. So I really appreciate all the friends in Venezuela. It is a very good learning opportunities for Chinese youth. I hope that we can work for socialism, to achieve socialism.
Con esos saludos de inicio, con mucha alegría, entonces instalamos esta segunda fase del seminario Venezuela en las luchas, pasado colonial, legado revolucionario regeneración comunitaria. En esta sesión, en esta primera sesión del año, tal como comentábamos al inicio, vamos a estar haciendo un recorrido intensivo por lo que han sido estos 20 años de construcción de revolución bolivariana, concretamente mirar Venezuela en cifras, como seguramente mencionará nuestro querido ministro. Vamos a tener entonces el privilegio el día de hoy de contar con una clase magistral por quien, como ya mencionaban las compañeras, es vicepresidente sectorial para la planificación de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela, también es ministro del Poder Popular para la Planificación en nuestro país, es licenciado en Geografía, con maestría en Planificación Urbana de la Universidad Central de Venezuela.
Sorry, Hernan, we don't have any English translation.
Yes, yes. Okay, Hernan, it's okay. Please, go ahead.
Yeah?
Yes, yes.
It's already working. Okay. Gracias.
Thank you. As I said, I was saying Ricardo Menendez, he is a geographer and he has a master's degrees in urban planning from the Central University of Venezuela. He was also a student leader. He was a representative of the FCU. He was a university professor. And since 2009, he was a minister of planning for science and technology. And in 2014, he also was minister, the planning minister. He was responsible, and he is responsible of the high-level joint commission China-Venezuela, and he is also president of the high-level commission Venezuela-Belarus. So without further ado, I will give the floor to the Minister Ricardo Menendez so he can start with his presentation. Thank you very much to all of you, and to congratulate you for the initiative taken in order to disseminate the different characteristics of the social processes in our countries and the struggles of our peoples. I would like to acknowledge the work done by the Simon Bolivar Institute in the framework of the different guidelines set by President Maduro. And this institute that has been recently created has organized different meetings which are extraordinary. In Venezuela, we have here a planning ministry, and in this planning ministry, there are several authorities participating from the different organizations. I know that we have 1 hour to do this presentation, but I'd like to have a look at what we have been doing over the 20 years in terms of achievements. So what we would like to tell you before. First, what has happened in the Bolivarian Venezuela historically. What is the model that we are pursuing and how we want to organize our society? The second topic is from the development of the revolution, we have been attacked. So it is important that the different scholars and universities and different institutions all around the world could understand all the aggression that has been unleashed against Venezuela. And in order to do so, we need to understand how imperialism is attacking our peoples in terms of, and they want to prevent us from ensuring our sovereignty. And then we will show some data from before the revolution and what we have been able to change thanks to revolution. And a fundamental point that we want to show is the building of a socialist revolutionary well-being, social well-being, how we have achieved a break point in terms of how our society has been organized from all realms, socially, economically, etc. So this change has been evident over these 20 years. And we would like to illustrate how some of these endeavors have been hit by the coercive measures imposed by the US administration and other governments, their allies, and how these actions that have been taken against our country have impacted the Bolivarian revolution. We will explain to you how we have been responding to that and how we intend to ensure development in our country. I would like to show the first slide, which has to do with the democracy in Venezuela. So, in our country, we say that there is no transformation process without the 5 dimensions of the society. From the political theory, we say that only the economic dimension was to be the driver of this construction of society. That President Chavez achieved to think about a way of transforming democracy. And he used to believe that it was only through the social transformation that this goal was to be attained. So for Venezuela, this is essential. And we can see this in the different indicators that we will show to you during this presentation. If we say that there is a democracy only in the political, but there is not a democracy in the social sphere, there is no true democracy. If we say that we have a democracy, but we still have a social discrimination and that there are marginalized zones in our country, we cannot say that we have a democracy. In the case of the Venezuelan democracy, we're talking about a participatory and democratic democracy, and all our organizations, all our goods are rights to our people. Rights that are understood. For instance, housing is a human right. Health is not a merchandise, it's a human right. So in Venezuela, in spite of the blockade, we have been able to face the pandemic. We have deployed protocols that are different from other countries, and you can compare the figures of Colombia with Venezuela's, and you will see the difference. In Venezuela, we have universal access to public, to health services. So this allows us to have a different approach. And this can be applied to all the different spheres of the development. So taking into consideration that notion of democracy, we have here, we would like to explain to you, theoretically speaking, what the contributions we can make. The Venezuelan democracy is a struggle for the construction of a participatory and protagonistic democracy. This is very important because Venezuela has been, people say that there is a dictatorship in Venezuela. But we can see that in practice, all our actions have to do with the defense of human rights. The human rights are enshrined in our constitution.
Subjects such as health, education, household, those are subjects that are constitutional in the case of Venezuela. On the other hand, Commander Chavez filed a complaint regarding the transformation of society from a development point of view.
As a whole,
we are trying to illustrate here.
We're trying to illustrate.
Oh, yep. I'm sorry.
Please continue. Yeah.
From the beginning? We have tried to illustrate the integral concept because part of the thesis is to demonstrate the socialist well-being model, the revolutionary model. In this case, we have the ideas of Commander Chavez, where he conceived the attendance of social needs as a doctrine for the revolution. So if we take a look at the human being and if we see the variance and the needs that the human being has, we have social needs, we have cultural needs, political needs, to name some of them, and then the set of policies that have to be developed to attend each one of them. The Bolivarian government assumes all its battlefronts in order to attack in a comprehensive manner each one of the components, that is clothing, health, housing, social security, access to information, household, culture, and also the political needs. This means that there is a concept that we are working in an integrated manner for human being in order to solve the needs of the human being. We will see how important changes took place in just 20 years and how that state of well-being is the main goal of the warfare against Venezuela. They want to attack the welfare of Venezuela. That is the focus, that is the goal, that is the target of the North American imperialism in order to undermine the social basis of our country. And apart from that, they want to generate a change of a regime. We have a constitutional, democratic, participatory, and protagonistic regime. So we must see the construction of this change of the level of life of Venezuelans. And you can take a look here at how we've been at the target of attacks. We can associate the different vortices for the development, social protection, food, education, health. All these are parts of the main targets for the attacks that have been perpetrated. This is for you to see an example. This is just to illustrate an example. It is not a comprehensive analysis. Theoretically, we are an atrocious dictatorship. We do not hold elections, supposedly. We have no level of participation of the community or of the society. But that is not the case. For 40 years, in the Fourth Republic, during those 40 years, they held 15 elections in Venezuela in the Fourth Republic. We have held 27 elections in 20 years. That means that in half of the time, we have held twice as much of the elections during the Bolivarian Revolution. We have had practically 1.4 elections per year, while in the Fourth Republic, they had 0.38 elections per year. This is like a reference for political reasons. As Hernan mentioned in other presentations, there were exercises where they explained the democratic systems that are promising. But when we say that in Venezuela there are more than 45,000 communal councils, more than 3,000 communes that are organized, and that the organization processes are better and better, then we can see the weight and the relevance of this topic. Next, if you allow me, if Hernan allows me, I would like to make reference to the following facts. Let's talk about an aggression context. In the case of Venezuela, we have the passing of Commander Chavez in the year 2013. We had an immediate response. That immediate response that we had at that moment had to do with the call for elections only 1 month after the passing of Commander Chavez. At that moment, when we had that election, President Maduro won in an heroic manner. Then we started to receive the first attacks in their attempt to undermine the Bolivarian Revolution. This is very important for the academic world. Some people might say, oh no, in Venezuela, what they have is a nefarious government. What they have in Venezuela, according to some people, there is a nefarious government. In November 2017, the problem started, but no, problem started way before that. We can take a look at the variables from the point of view of the change of currency, and we can see how the currency parity started to be attacked as of October 2012 in the middle of the political campaign of Commander Chavez. That is when the process of alteration of the currency started. The inflation rate started. The exchange rate started at 9, 10 bolivars per dollar and ended at 17 to 20 bolivars per dollar, almost twice as much. And we're talking about the year 2012. We are not talking about last year. Another case that you might remember, maybe you've read it in the press, was what happened in the regional elections of 2012 up until January 2013. There were processes that were linked to the shortage of food, where large companies were involved. Companies that have to do in terms of logistics. You can analyze in the press how President Maduro, who was then the executive vice president of the republic, started to attack the problem of shortages, to the point that when Commander Chavez, once he was ill, he came back to the country and he gave the instruction to prepare an attack against the economic warfare. That was an instruction that Commander Chavez gave when he was hospitalized in Caracas. This means that the attack vision from an economic warfare point of view did not start with the sanctions. The sanctions is just part of the escalation. But the real truth is that the attack started way back. From the political point of view, and from the nationality or the Venezuelan point of view, in order to call it somehow, in December 2013, the Chavism won in the municipal elections. That electoral victory of the Chavism, after 1 year of attacks against the country, of attacks against the economic vision, took sectors of the oppositions to just separate themselves from the electoral aspects, and they just resorted to violence. That is when they started what the opposition called the rupture of the constitutional order. They called it La Salida. And they began violent manifestations and demonstrations, assassinations, ambushes in the street, in order to attack. These are three aspects that are quite important and that you must understand, and that have to do with the rupture of one way of thinking. The first breaking point was the generation of violent demonstration in such a magnitude that they could tell the world that Venezuela could not be governed, and that the government was not able to keep the internal peace. That was the first thesis. And it is very important because that started a period of 7 years where there was an opposition that was characterized for being interventionist, not only for selling the country, but for intervening the country. The first matrix has to do with the violence in the street for the movement called Green Helmets to reestablish order. They said they had violence in 7 or 8% of the territory, and they wanted to say that the country had demonstrations nationwide, but that was not the truth. They wanted to say that there was not a democracy. So that is the concept of worldwide democracy. Then we had the year 2014, where a set of statements, international statements were given, and a large pressure was put against our country on the Tenazas operation in 2015. This operation had to do with an attack against the country. It is an attack that started from the border of Guyana, from the border of Colombia against Venezuela. This attack has to do with a decree of President Obama where he said that Venezuela was a threat. In 2005, Obama declared that Venezuela was a threat. And they said that, but it was just a minority that said that. They said that our country was a threat. But Maduro would say that that would be a confession of that part. President Obama in 2014 said if we didn't have that doses of realism, we would not reach our goals. We have the army, the strongest army of the world, and on some occasions we have to simply obey other countries or try to put violence on other countries if they don't want to do what we want them to do from an economical, diplomatic, and sometimes military point of view. So that is a doctrine. What happened in 2015? Venezuela was decreed as a threat. The offensive was started in order to create a regional distortion, for people to suppose that Venezuela was a distortion at a regional level. That Venezuela had 8 million inhabitants that had exited the country. 8% is just a fifth part of our population. Because if 25% of the population have left, the availability of food, etc., should have risen, but that's not the case. So they just wanted to tell a lie and invent a figure, and that's it. So they wanted to pretend to show that Venezuela was an alteration, a perturbation. And then there was an attack from Cucuta and from Miami. They wanted to put pressure for the rise of the dollar. And in some areas of our country, they wanted to generate a smuggling problem, a smuggling of up to 40% of food. Imports that our countries had generated were affected by the dollars. We imported 300,000 tons of rice, and that was smuggled to Colombia. And we were there, we were witnesses, we were discussing with the Colombian government, and we asked them, how is it possible that you are working with exportation and of this type of material, of raw material? Their only concern as a government was that they were collecting the taxes of that material that they were extracting through smuggling from Venezuela. So the matrices that we had from Venezuela had to do with an economic warfare. Another manner was a humanitarian crisis war. So you can take a look at the three elements: a lack of governability due to the street violence that had been generated, the violence that is linked to the economic war, and the humanitarian crisis. What is the common element? The military intervention in Venezuela. That is why there is a new element that has been incorporated where sectors of the opposition say that part of the Venezuelan territory should not belong to Venezuela and should be given to those who serve others, like the Essequibo. Why the Essequibo? Because it is related to concepts of Venezuelan aspects, the ideological ideas. It is very difficult for some people to pretend that part of the territory would be divided. These sectors have been affecting topics that they have even built themselves. There are other subjects that are linked to an aggression. Here we have some figures that show the drop of the revenues of the country. This is very important. The subtitle of this component that we would like to illustrate has to do with characteristics and the components to generate the suffocation, the economic suffocation of a country. That would be like the index that we would like to refer to, a drop of revenues. This has to do with many variables, the price of oil. It has to do with concrete actions of the financial and economical blockade. It has to do with repair works, with repair spare parts. So approximately $52 billion that we could have received in the Central Bank of Venezuela, we just received a little bit more than $700,000. That is a little bit over 1% from the point of view of the revenues that we would usually receive before. So on one hand, we had a vector that dropped and that was linked to the revenues, to the income of the country. On the other hand, we have the attack against our currency. This curve that we have here is the parallel dollar and the inflation rate. That correlation is over 90%, 0.9. And it indicates how the parallel dollar has been permanently applied as a weapon for alteration from the point of view of the economics of our country. Every time there is an alteration or a peak from the currency point of view, there has to be a political milestone. For example, the Constituent Assembly will finish its term in July 2017, or finished its term in 2017. We had an inflation rate that was X. Then we had regional elections. There was a slight change in that value. And when the opposition lost the elections for 19 of the governorships, they decided to just leave the electoral processes. They decided to not participate. And then there was an inflation rate of more than 700% from November to May. This means that permanently, whenever there is a political milestone, there's always an attack, an aggression to the currency. The use of the dollar and the parity are used as an attack against our country. I would like to make reference to some components. On one hand, we have influence from the point of view of the revenues in the Republic. We also have the part that has to do with the crushing or annihilation of the country's currency. Then there's a freezing of the resources abroad. When I talk about freezing of the resources, we have outside Venezuela more than $5 billion in international accounts. These resources could solve many of the problems that have to do with humanitarian crisis. In England, for example, they have the money that has to do with CLAP. In other countries, they have the resources related to the agri-food industry. Part of other resources are being kept in banks of the European community. So many of the resources that we do need to confront and to solve our internal issues are kept abroad. For example, PDVSA has stopped producing $102 billion as a consequence of direct losses. And besides, $116 billion have been lost. These are concrete actions, crimes against humanity perpetrated by the US against Venezuela. The United Nations should try to work on this because these are crimes against humanity against one country, regardless of other attacks. Like, for example, to take resources from the international system to fake some figures from countries and to grant resources to other countries. We imagine that some of them will have to show how they generated those resources. For example, 5 million people who've migrated, we would like to know if they were granted some money. So what happens in that case? who returns those resources to the international system? What happens when they played a game by using Venezuela not only to attack it internally, but as a business model that is linked to other countries? For example, recently, we saw how the government of Colombia asked for money to the international system to put the vaccine on the Venezuelan citizens who are in Colombia. So, well, that is part of the theses that we are analyzing. Here, this is a quote from a renowned writer. His name is Elliot Abrams. He is a person who's very honest, sarcastically. He has nothing to do with the aggressions against people. Well, this man says that attacking the Chavism is simply to us a war of survival and the imposition of a reason that should prevail over the other ones. Imagine representatives, and he's here talking to the representatives of the American Parliament. Imagine for a second that we that we let the Chavistas govern and we allow them to carry out their social projects without taking into account our companies, even though our values have been theirs for almost 2 centuries. So are we going to allow that in Venezuela there is socialism representatives? That is his concept of the non-intervention. Could you believe that what could that provoke on the Latin American region? This is one of the most structural convention of interventionism that has ever said. It has to do with the fear of what the Venezuelan resistance can represent. Could you imagine what it would represent to build 3 million houses? What would be the destination of our model if we don't intervene on projects of health or education, in the formation of military, or in the acquisition of elements for their defense? Are we going to allow socialism to triumph in that country? A system that has been declaring war since we constituted ourselves as a leading democracy in the free market? Hence, those of us who are not with us must undergo the worst needs. Well, there for sure we can see some elements. First, the use of war as an element of economy. When he mentions the use of weapons and the denial of the market, and also the route that they suppose. When he says that those of us who are not with us must experience the worst deprivations, that is the roadmap. On the roadmap, what they place are all the achievements of the society, and they try to study how they can undermine those achievements. What have we done in Venezuela during the past few years? The first thing is very important. From the social investment point of view, we have we have gone from social investment values of 40% to 76.4% of social investment that is vinculated to social aspects. The rates that are vinculated to every one of the specific policies have been increased in 63 folds. In the case of health, this amount, 35. In the case of housings, science and technology, 71 times. So this means that we have been generating lots of resources. This has to do with the social organization, and this corresponds to the changes and the different organizations of our population. There are attack vectors. I would like you to take a look at this. The first thing that happened in Venezuela Well, before we made reference to the model of attack, to the way in which they wanted to suffocate Venezuela. Now I want to show how, before that suffocation model, and taking into account a series of indexes, economical indexes, how before that attack vector, we have developed a transformation from the point of view of social transference, the economical transference, in order to be able to resist. This means that there is a new economical model that tries to change in the grassroots level. So what the imperialism sees as an impositive system, what we try to do is to affect and to undermine the basis of the Bolivarian revolution. The revolution says, okay, if this is what they attack, we're going to do the contrary from investment points of view, resources point of view, in order to protect that grassroots level. Let us see if there have been important transformations of social indicators. Let's see what the trends have been, and let's see what happens with the aggression model. I would like to talk about 3 moments that has to do with the economical and social transference. First, the recognition of the public areas. That would seem something that is irrelevant, to recognize what is public. Well, the pandemic has shown how important public things are. Even though the organization of society is important, the defense of education and public health is also important. We must recognize what the public aspect means in view of the responsibilities of the country. Those of you who are listening to us out of Venezuela and inside Venezuela, you might understand how scholarity or school enrollment changed in Venezuela. In 1999, Commander Chavez said that they could not charge the enrollment, school enrollment in Venezuela. But now we've been delivering free computers like the Canaimas. We've been granting the bicentennial collection, etc. A second moment had to do with the missions. How we organized for it to be a policy. And then we have the last stage, which has to do with the protection before the war, because evidently there is an impact that we have received. There is an aggression that is huge that we have been received, and we received that attack with less resources. So what can we do more? What can we do with less?
Okay. Bien. ¿Qué es lo siguiente que viene? Viene todo el ataque, toda la agresión que se genera contra el salario.
What is next? We have attack against wages.
So there is an attack against the workers' salaries, which is one of the most important challenges. The salaries increase, the salaries and wages increase of salaries is very important. So to break with all the attack in terms of the foreign currency in Venezuela, this is a country who has been very dependent on oil, but we have not yet achieved the development of other productive chains. So this is one of the challenges, how to create development chains domestically. So there is a series of policies that we have been putting in place. Then we had a very high inflation that was created by the foreign currency war, and they wanted to undermine the population's salaries. And the president, and back then, in the first 20 years, we had 53 increases in wages. So we were put under the pressure of having very high inflation because of all these attacks, and the government, in response to those attacks, and inflation, decided to increase also salaries. So this is what we tried to do for a period of time. But then we decided to change and start giving the population bonuses and financial aids. In Venezuela, we have 33 million inhabitants, and we are helping 21 million people through these bonuses and financial aids through a digital platform. So the vast majority of the population is in that platform and are receiving financial aids. CLAP, which are the commissions or committees for food suppliers. We deliver food supplies through these committees. We know that this is not the permanent solution that we want to put in place for our population, because what we would want our people to do is to get their main staples in a supermarket, of course. But we have been constrained to resort to these policies to give direct aid to our population, to our children. In the case of CLAP, of this food provision committees, we have been attending more than 6 million children in primary education, and 5.5 million receive the food program. We have been covering more than 3,000 schools all over the country. So we know that we have had difficulties over the time, but we have been ensuring food to our children. And this is part of the policies that we have been putting in place. Then we have also other programs. I will give you an example. In 2017 and 2018, we were facing major difficulties. And the president was very concerned about ensuring primary school to our children, about providing them with the education school supplies necessary for children to go to classes. So in the midst of the warfare, all these efforts continued. We continued delivering textbooks, pencils, crayons, erasers that were difficult to obtain because of the economic warfare. But the government made its efforts and ensured there's bonuses and assistance for educational supplies. So you could probably wonder, how is all this possible in the midst of this economic warfare? Well, this has been possible because the president has been particularly concerned about providing, as I said, education, school supplies to our children, as well as toys, and as well as access to public services in the midst of the warfare. So we see that there has been a constant aggression that has been increasing. And as it increases, we see also that we increase in investment, in social investment through our different policies. Hernan tells me that everyone is following this presentation and taking notes, but in the previous slide, we said that we had a 700 million in income, and the previous year were similar. But in terms of direct transfers that we give for social and public services, like electricity, education, food, etc., over the last 3-4 years of warfare, we have invested more than $13 billion in direct transfers to the population. So we have had a reduction in our income, and of course, we have had an impact in terms of international investment. But we have been able, in the midst of these difficulties, to increase social investment. It is very difficult for us to support the social investment, but we have continued in spite of that. So how have we been organizing the transfer of this resources in order to fight back? Of course, we still have to face challenges, but we have been doing this in order to face the economic warfare. We have been overcoming many problems, but there is a social welfare, and this is the purpose, the defense of that welfare state, regardless of the attacks. In our presentation, we have quoted many statements made by US high officials. This is a statement made by Richard Black when he said in an interview the following: "We have demonetized their currency." And this is the senator, an American senator, who said this. We have demonetized their currency through the international banking system, and now the Venezuelan currency has no value. And then we go and say, look, this government is very bad because their currency is worthless. Well, they didn't do it. We did it. We rendered their currency useful. The United States has a blockade on exports and Venezuelan exports in oil. And then we say, look how they fail to feed their people. So they are confessing their crimes through this kind of statements. In Venezuela, we will publish all this material that is going to be available in the website of the planning ministry. More than 200 pages of figures concerning the situation in our country, which illustrate what has been happening in the recent years. This is just a sample, because there are many more attacks that have been unleashed against Venezuela. If you will allow me now. Well, Hernan says that we can go on for 5 more hours. But just let me give you some information on these figures here in order to contrast these figures what would happen in reality. Let's see now the unmet basic needs and poverty. As you know, there are several mechanisms through which we can measure poverty. We can measure it through the income. Of course, we have a high impact because of the attack of we have against our currency. But here we're going to measure poverty through unmet basic needs. We have housing, services, access to services, schooling, and economic dependency. How many countries who are participating in the aggressions against Venezuela can show the same values? Because according to this scheme, we have a 30% poverty in midst of this economic warfare. And we have been able to reduce this figure until 17% and 4% extreme poverty. Why is it possible to put it down, to decrease the poverty? Well, because of the public policies implemented by the government are attacking structural variables. Housing, for instance, tackles 3 variables of the unmet needs in terms of construction of houses. Schooling is another variable, and economic dependency is another variable. So we are designing a public policy, as I explained before in the previous slides. The construction of the public policy is based on attacking the reasons of poverty. This is a fundamental element for our revolutionary policy. And this is how we can explain how is it possible to pursue under this model of development. Here you can see another index regarding school attendance. The in-attendance school rate. Here we see that almost 2.2 children, had it not been for our revolution, they would not be attending school. So this is just for you to have an idea. Another rate has to do with crowding, overcrowding in households. We have put this level down to 4.4%. I'm sure that in China you have different values, but for you to have an idea, let me tell you that when we finish the housing mission we will conclude in 2025 the housing mission, we will have 5 million housing units. That will mean that we would have a reorganized 40% of the housing units of our country. So this is a structural correction, and this is very important in terms of our process. Now, another rate has to do with improper housing. And this is, of course, one of the most important policies. And another one who has to do with the basic services. Here, you can see an increase. If we compare it with the numbers at the beginning of the revolution, we can see a difference. We can see an increase. And this increase has to do with all the policies implemented in face of the blockade. The blockade is indeed a challenge for us because we want to break from the economic dependency. I'll just give you one example. A turbine that has a patent, international patent. We need to buy all the spare parts abroad. And if you cannot purchase those spare parts, you have to create your own product, or you have to have an international policy that will guarantee the purchase of that spare part. Aaron says that the free market needs to rule everything, but here we don't have that. So there are some very delicate problems in terms of services, in terms of economic dependency of households, so on and so forth. Here we have the rate related unemployment. We have had constant reduction of unemployment rates. Look at this other slide here. It is shown more clearly. Whenever the Venezuelan opposition increases their tax, we see how unemployment grows. In 2004, we had almost 20% peak, and we have been decreasing that rate. The average is 6 and 7%. Today, we should be at 4.5%. And we are currently in 6%. But the aggression vector by the opposition wanted to attain, or wanted for us to have 25% unemployment. But thanks to the revolution's efforts, this has not been possible. We have been able to contain all these aggressions. And there is an attack from the opposition, there is then an increase in unemployment. In 2020, we reached 8.8% of unemployment due to the pandemic. And we know that the world's figures are much higher. The United States had 15% unemployment in the pandemic. Colombia, 20%. Well, we are at 8.8% of unemployment. The war, the economic warfare has also hit the way in which people work, and we are currently analyzing the creation of new jobs in order to respond and help households in this fight. Hernan says that I need to go faster regarding the figures. If we had not had the revolution in Venezuela, we would have 1.7 million people unemployed, almost 2 people unemployed, but we don't have those figures. The revolution has created 5.4 million jobs. So we have 15 million people of active population. So we have created almost a third part of the total active population. And of course, we have favored formal jobs. By the end of this year, we will have an increase in the creation of jobs, and we will show positive results. Now, regarding the pensioners, we have more than 5 million pensioners, retired population. We have been updating this information because we have more pensioners per year. We have 5 million pensioners. If we had the previous economic models, 4 million people would not have this, would not be covered. But today we are adding up more than 600 more new pensioners per year. Another figure here has to do with the Gini coefficient to measure inequality. When we started, it was at 0.41, and we have arrived at 0.37, and the goal is to attain 0.26 in 2025. But of course, due to the economic warfare, we had an increase to 0.38. Of course, they are attacking our model because we have an equity model. Brazil has 0.53, Colombia 0.50. So with all the attacks, we are at 0.3. Now, what do we need to do now? We need to face the dollarization of our economy, and this has created some conditions that explain this figure. Another field where we have had achievements is in the food sector. We have here different processes. In 2010, 2012, the FAO recognized the policies that had been implemented by the government. But those indicators that were under 0.5 went up and then started going down, as you can see in the slide. I don't know if you can see here that the curve that is there. Let's look at the curve, because there is important achievements in the Fourth Republic in the past, then an increase of the warfare consequences, effects, and then we see how our social indicators are affected, and then the response of the revolutionary endeavors. But we can see here how there is a decrease on food needs.
But then we see that the curve goes up thanks to the government's policies. Now the question is, where should we locate it as? Over 15%, but they were not successful. Unemployment was 4.5 or 6. They wanted us to have 20% unemployment, but here we should be under 5, and they put us at 12, but they wanted us to get 40. So this is important because this shows the resilience that Venezuela has put in place in order to face all these attacks. What have we done in the view of all this? The CLAP, which are the food provision committees that have been providing food to the population. We started in 2017 and continued. And here we can see the figures of the amount of food that has been distributed. And why do we have an increase? Because of the economic conditions. And the humanists of the Pentagon and the humanists of the Venezuelan opposition asked for more sanctions against this policy of food provision. However, you can see here that we have distributed more than 120 million boxes of aid and through different production channels. Fernand says that I should go faster, but what we can see here is the different products, sugar, coffee, and also here we see supermarkets and the different distribution channels. And we can see an increase of the distribution channels that are associated to CLAP, which is very important. This has been changing all the time. We see a variation according to the products, but the important thing is to see how the distribution channels have been evolving over time, and how we can see an increase in the provision of sugar, coffee, proteins, etc. Some criticize our policies, but our policies have made wonders. And I'm talking specifically about the housing mission in Venezuela. Here we can see what was done in the past and what has been done in our revolution. And this gives us more than 4 million housing units that have been built. And this includes, of course, also all the repairing works and revamping of housing units. Here I'm showing the slide of illiteracy, how we have been correcting illiteracy over the time. What you can see in red is the current period. And the first years of the revolution, more than 5 million people started learning how to read and write. And today we have significantly reduced literacy in our country. The increase of the education registration, you can see 6.2 in the past and now 10.4 in the present. More than 4 million people are studying today in the education nation system. 4 million people who have been incorporated. And our goal is to attain 13 million in the forthcoming years. And the average education rate goes from 6.7 to 9 or 10%. Here we can see also a slide of the professionalization of workers in our country. You can see here the violet column and the yellow column, which correspond to technical university school. or education. Technical university training before the revolution was 900,000 people, and today it's up to 5 million people who have a technical diploma or university degree, which is a very important change indeed. And now here we have the different rates of education registration. We have more than 8,700,000 students who are currently attending the national education system. Here we have also the schooling rate. We started at 46% when we started our revolution, and today we are at 99%. In primary school, 90%, today we are at 95%, and the secondary school, 53%, and today we are at 84%. Of course, we can see that in the secondary school, we made great achievements. Here, the number of schools and education establishments that went up 30%. And here you can see the importance of the endeavor, the efforts. 84% of the country are attending public schools. So the state is taking over the education policy, ensuring free education to all, and 16% of them have access to the food planning. Here we can see different slides with the data pertaining teachers, professors, and in this map that you can see here, we see red dots. So this is just to give you an idea of the national coverage of the food program. 23,000 schools which are receiving this food school program. Other indicators, for instance, health. In the pandemic, we have seen a different behavior in the curves, where we can see the advance that has been made. We had 43,000 hospitals, and today, now we have more than 25,000. So we have covered 93% of the territory. It does not mean that we do not have problems in terms of treatments or medicines, but the facilities are all over the country. Now, this is also a slide on health as an objective of the warfare. And here we are showing the different treatments that are being administered. You can see how we have increased the healthcare, and you can see also the levels of perturbation. The perturbation are explained because of the warfare.
Why is radiology affected? Well, because most of the supplies are imported. Why surgeries were prioritized? Because also the supplies were imported. So every time we have one of these peaks, this is their victory. People from the Pentagon, your victory is the pain of the people. That was your victory. So we made like a counterflow to decrease those levels of impacts. What we have here are crimes against humanities. These are crimes against humanities. The United Nations should get active to be able to solve these issues. This is the lethality rate of children below 5 years of age. We received this rate in 25.8. That was the mortality rate. That mortality rate decreased in a progressive manner until it reached 14 points. This is where the war began. Then the rate went up to 20 points, and those values dropped again to 14.5. The shape of the curve is quite important. We must take a look at it, because it's not a matter of having the war vector decreasing. No, the action of the state has increased, the protection action. And if there is a crime, it is because there was an action to attack and to confront the attack. These are the values that have been handled and that have to do with the mortality of children below 5 years of age. The mortality of children below 1 year of age. We started in almost 26 points. This is the construction of the well-being status. When the rate goes down, when we go down, but then the empire says, how is it possible that they're going to be successful? We must attack them. So this is what they did. The rate went up to 10, 20, now it dropped to 10. So there was an inflection. Does this mean that the problems are solved? No, but it means that there is a hopeful policy, a policy that has been in constant changes, that have to be modified. We must generate currency for this. This is the crucial point for this aspect. Now, to which figure did they want to take this? And they even published these points. They wanted to take this to 32 or 33 points, the mortality rate, but they couldn't surpass 20%. This is not a value that we want. We want to have 10%, and our goal was below 10%. So these are values, show what we've done. And the maternal mortality rate. This is a value that we still have to accomplish because this policy is quite sensitive. However, we were able to increase it up to 130 and now it's dropping to 84. It is still a very high value, but evidently it implies what I wanted to show you, which was the inflection point. Hernan says that I still have 4 hours left. I want to show you this as a synthesis. Social needs of the population. The Democrat said, if you're not with us, then let them suffer. So it was a diagnosis of the needs of the population. If the person needs to eat, I will take away his food. If the person needs to get clothes, I will take away the clothes. If the person needs to build a house, I will take away the material. That is the imperialist policies against Venezuela. Regardless of the fact that we can solve many problems, because we do have them, and we have the responsibility to solve them, but that is a vector of attack that they have. So what do? They put focus on that policy. They reduced to 1%. The goal was to affect the capacity of action. Speculation with the inflation. The goal was to affect the lifestyle and the performance of the population. The blockade of more than $5 billion, less than more than $120 billion. And what was the goal? The suffocation, the economic suffocation. So their goals were very clear. The central objective to attack the people, to make them renounce to the sovereignty and to the right to build a nation. Take a look at this. I wanted to show you this for you to see the shape of the graphic and the shape of the curve. First, we have the attack vector, reduction of the revenues. We are doing a synthesis right now. So the vector of attack, revenues. Increase of country risk. But the country is a good payer. They pay on time. And they have paid $102 billion. And they lose almost 106 billion in oil. So that means that I take away money from it, I reduce their income, and I make it even more expensive for them to ask for money. I alter the internal economy. Those are the inflation curves. I reduce the income and I increase the exit. Social investments are increased through transferences. So a curve where there is a drop in income and increase in exit, the reaction of the government is to increase the levels of protection. And here we can see only one curve, which shows the impact. There you can see the impact of something that was stabilizing. And you can see how the aggression level increased it, and then you can see that the aggression vector went down again. Let us take a look at this very quickly. Reduction in revenues, affection of the purchasing capacity of the population, reaction of the state in social policies, and social changes in social policies and modifications of rates. Here, dear friends, what is at stake as a country is the right to self-determination. That is what is at stake. What is at stake is that if the country have the right or not to decide by themselves. That is the key aspect of the debate. We do not issue opinions. We do not interfere on what we think about the North American Parliament takeover. We do not interfere on the policies of other countries, but we do believe that as the Venezuelan aspects have been vulnerated, aspects that have to do with respect of institutions, respect for the territorial integrity of Venezuela. These are subjects where codes have been broken by the opposition. Likewise, the international system should reevaluate and rethink where they can go to. How can they exclude this as a premise of the imperialism? Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Minister Menendez, Ricardo Menendez, for such a detailed explanation of different aspects, ranging from the national plan and the assumptions of planning in Venezuela up to the context and the development of the Venezuelan policies within the framework of the imperialist attack against the nation, against the coercive measure. So he presented this development of the public policies and the clashes between the imperialism and the government measures against these imperialist attacks. During his speech, we have had a participation through Zoom of approximately 60 people. And through streaming in China, through Bibli, we have had almost 4,840 people. Now we are going to have a questions and answers session. What we used to do is that we read the questions that are made through the streaming in China and the questions done through Zoom. So Jake, let us begin by reading the questions through the streaming in China. I would like to ask our minister to be attentive to the questions so that he is able to answer them later on.
Yes. Hernan?
Yes, I can hear you.
Maybe stop the share screen first.
Okay. Listo.
Yeah. Thank you very much for Minister's speech. And we have 3 questions from China. And I also typed the question in the chat room, but I will read it out. The question 1, you mentioned the plan for 2025. We have heard a lot about the communes in Venezuela and feel that they are exemplary for community local governance. We are very interested in their development. Could you tell us how your planning ministry allocates funds or a mixed policy to strengthen the communes? Question 2. I am a member of the rural reconstruction movement in China. The achievements of the Bolivarian Revolution are impressive. From the figures given by the minister, the social indices on education and health are very significant. Can you tell us Venezuela advanced towards food sovereignty? How do you support community agriculture to produce food for Venezuela's own population? The last question, how is the situation of health during the pandemic now? Do you have traditional medicine and indigenous health practices? I hope our Chinese government can have more cooperation with Venezuela because we have good traditional medicine in China. Are there cooperation between China and Venezuela governments on this? Thank you very much.
Gracias, Jade, por entonces leer las preguntas que están.
Thank you, Jade, for reading the questions that were written in the streaming in China. Next, I'm going to read some of the questions that we have had through Zoom. One of them is, some of them are questions and other are comments. First, a question. Is it essential that with this strategic plan that has been described by the National Executive, you have worked with an analysis like the flow type analysis, like the NATO professor? Could we make a field study to find more responses for this topic? Dear Minister, in this war against Venezuela, with its severe consequences against our people, it is a paradox that the planning in the national agriculture is been almost totally deconfigured and reduced to a TV show. Venezuela can produce more than 100 products if we plan actions in January. The peasant agriculture generates more than 70 areas of products, and that is where our government should support the local production. What is your opinion about this? Could you lead the planning actions of the sustainable culture in this month in our country? They're offering you a job, Minister. So from the social transfer, is it necessary for them to be considered? Is it necessary for social transfer to be considered within the indexes established by the UNO to measure the advances of the revolutionary public policies? The model that is used to measure currently leave aside the possibility to show extraordinary advances. The possibility to create a nation with all the social transferences that we do is denied according to designs established by the UNO. We must create strategies that defend those contributions. We salute the panel and we appreciate the clarity of your exposition. There is another question that has to do with the CLAP. It is a project that was proposed in the state of Aragua as an alternative to help the poorest families of the communities. And the project later was executed throughout the country thanks to the Venezuelan perseverance. We can always make progress, all united as a nation. So far, those are the questions and comments we have. If there are other comments or other questions, we will ask the participants to please write them down through the different channels we have. Next, we will give the floor to the minister for him to answer some of the questions and make some comments. Thank you. I wanted to show you all the comrades that perform the duties in the Ministry of Planning. They are all part of the team that work on an alternative planning, on the popular planning. Okay, I think that the most important thing of the questions, Hernan, and I imagine this is a part of the interesting thing of this space, has to do with the debate of the discussions. We must not get confused with demonstrating the advances of a revolution. This is not equal to not having problems. I mean, we do have problems, we do have difficulties, and we do have challenges. We do not have a manual. We don't have a book to build socialism. That book doesn't exist. I showed a slide where we explained how the Plan de la Patria was built. And it included the most important methodological contributions in our country. Because if we assume that democracy is participatory and protagonistic, it is not one central planning commission, the one that created the Homeland Plan or the Plan de la Patria. And I will repeat this. It was not the Ministry of Planning itself with important specialists, the one that created the Homeland Plan. No. We called for popular assemblies. We called for, and we held 34,000 popular assemblies. We had 3.5 million people attending those meetings and assemblies. We had a systematization of the activities. That is very important because the most important vector of the war has to do with the affection of economy. But affecting the morale of the people is another vector that is important, and that is even the most important one. So resorting to a process from a popular organization point of view is crucial. They also asked a question I don't know, Hernan, and I also asked this question to my friends from the Simón Bolívar Institute, because if there is an academic activity that does not end in a provocation, it's not very useful. So I think that you should invite our friends from other universities to systematize our experiences, to see our experiences, not just to believe on what we are saying. They have to go to the field. They have to see what we are doing. That is much more valuable, much more important than the graphics that we showed you. You have to see things for real. You have to see the things that are positive, the things that are negative, and how regardless of the problems, people have a clear horizon on the main duties to build a nation. And I say this because I'm going to talk about the Homeland Plan and the local governments and the communal governments, which is one of the challenges that we have. We have had an experience that is called the Communal Homeland Plan. This Communal Homeland Plan tries that the 1,849 specific goals of the Homeland Plan have to exist everywhere, in all different spaces. There is not only one goal. I mean, it has to be nationwide. If it is a systemic order, it has to be present everywhere. So when in a slum or in a community, in a neighborhood, we take the goals of the Homeland Plan and they are good to solve the problems of that community, a community of 200 houses or 300 houses, there is a political internationalization aspect of what the plan means. We must decode those macro goals and we must convert them into concrete solutions. When that happens, then we have what is called the belonging, the sense of belonging, and that is when the revolution starts. And it happens through the solution of problems. That is, we have some macro goals, so we have the Homeland Plan, and we have three specific plans. We have the sectorial plans, which is part of what we have seen, and there I'm going to talk about agriculture. We have sectorial plans, institutional plans, and spatial plans. So what is solved in each of these areas has to go from a national scale, regional scale, sub-regional scale, and local scale. And in the local scale, we must take into account the city, the field, all the issues that have to do with the urban system and the community. We have developed this communal homeland plan. This is a duty that is still being worked on, but the main goal is to solve problems in the commune. And this has to be done everywhere. And it has to be done by the ministers. It's not a matter of having the ministers going to the communities and telling people what to do. No, we must see how the people in that neighborhood solve their problems, etc. And that has to be a mandate for each one of the ministers. It has to be a dialectic process. Dialectics is that way. I mean, no one wrote about it. These are live processes. These are dynamic processes. The President of the Republic, and I will make two quotes. The first quote is Commander Chavez made a quotation, a quote. In his second mandate, he talked about the commune. And President Maduro has made emphasis right now on the subject of the communal parliament. The Homeland Plan is a subject that is still being developed and that should be developed by the National Assembly and also by the popular power and also by all the social actors. The Homeland Plan says that there are some spatial scales that, as I said, are national, regional, until we get to the communities. And there is a system, and that system implies resources, decisions, competencies, actors, and the managements. That matrix, that is spatial and thematic, defined what each person must do and how the system must be included in a network. We have to take into account the matrices, the flows, etc. And this will be developed by all the people that have different competencies. I talk about this because the communes are very important. They're not just one singular aspect of the revolutionary process. We don't have to divide the revolutionary process in different segments. No, we have to add all those segments. We must solve all the problems and sometimes we've made mistake. We've simply said that the problem is to transfer something. Because people say, okay, go ahead and do the plan and then I'll see if I will follow it. No, this has to be actually linked with the planning system. Anyhow, I would suggest that through Hernan, I would suggest that if any of the answers do not satisfy your question, please let us know and we could provide you with some additional topics. So, well, local governments can improve the communes and the central policies. Right now, the Venezuelan state has a huge challenge, which is the Homeland Plan. The basis of this statistic program needs a spatial unit. And it has to do with the real estate, and the real estate is added based on the blocks, and the blocks are added based on communities. So the community becomes a statistic unit, a unit of public design. So it is a huge challenge that we have ahead. So the different types of sectors that we have should have a public policy codification with a dialectic relationship from the relationship point of view between the urban form, the social class, the cultural, political, social identity, and that we must have a policy for each one of those typologies. Next, there is a question that has to do with the sovereignty, right? With the agri-food sovereignty. Well, We could accuse all the problems and we could attribute all the problems to the blockade. We could sit down and cry about these problems that have to do with the blockade, or we can denounce the blockade. And at the same time, we can assume the challenges of the blockade. We have our general productive system that is highly dependent. When we talk about Venezuela and we talk about the petroleum rentierism, we are not talking about the revenues of oil. No. We are also talking about a cultural coding. And this is translated into high levels of urban concentrations in our country. 87% of the people is living in specific areas. Most of the people live in 380 cities in Venezuela. Almost 40% of the population live in the first 12 cities. So there are levels of concentrations that are important and that have to do with the way the cities are organized. And in the productive area, one of the expressions of the oil rentierism has to do with the productive chains. That is one of the main components. The productive apparatus, whatever you want to call it, you can call it assembly system. And how is the Venezuelan agricultural system? Well, a large part of our challenge is to break the assembly infrastructure. That is part of the problem. And I'm not mentioning the other problems that have to do with the seeds, the bio supplies, the land, the conflict on the land, the social conflict on the land, the conflict on the land owners, topics that have to do with the principles, the peasants. These are principles that have to do with identity. This coexists with agro-industrial system as long as there are standards. One of the main challenges right now is to produce our own food. That is one of our fundamental problems. The same way we saw the map before, the map where we showed the human being, our nutrition has to be solved by ourselves. We have had the collaboration with China in that sense. We can still strengthen some other areas, but we have had an important participation and cooperation in agriculture from China. We have some diversities in areas that do not correspond with our consumption patterns necessarily. So we have huge challenges that are linked to this system. The Homeland plan is the one that governs. We must develop the sectorial plans of every area. The agri-food sector, the service sector, all of them have to have a sectorial plan. And each one of the components must be taken into consideration.
As you can see, these are challenges that we need to face. The food sector needs to be addressed constantly. All the system that we have deployed to address the social needs is the fundamental responsibility of the Venezuelan planning and the creation of the new mechanisms that we will put in place in the future. How can we achieve independency in different chains of production? Well, depending on the circumstances. If you are under blockade, you need to create the means to reactivate production. You need to produce whatever inputs are necessary. So this is part of the challenge, and this is what we are doing, currently doing in order to maintain our programs. Regarding the health sector and the pandemic, I would like to propose to the Simon Bolivar Institute to invite the health minister to have an exchange on the matter, because Venezuela has an important contribution to make in terms of the pandemic. I'm just going to give you an example. The way in which the health system has addressed the pandemic has been very effective. The way in which we have get organized in our territory in order to guarantee that there is healthcare provision in all the communities, thanks to the Cuban friends. And we have been able to cover all the territory. The president has also mobilized the people in a prevention campaign. In a voluntary manner, we have organized very successful security protocols. We have the 7x7 strategy, which is a strategy in order to address the pandemic situation. And of course, we have also benefited from the cooperation of other countries in this. And we have been looking at what China did in order to control the pandemic and to install the quarantines. And then you can see the results per country. In our case, we have a flattened curve over the time, and we have avoided the peaks. We have been working in order to flatten the curve and avoid the peaks, to avoid precisely what people expected that it would happen in Venezuela, that the health system was going to be in a deep crisis. Well, we avoided that thanks to our protocols, because we guaranteed healthcare to everyone. We distributed medicines through the public system. And we even provided medicines to the private clinics, because we're talking about human rights here. It's not a right that has been mercantilized. On the contrary, it's universal. China has also been contributing in these efforts, such as Russia, Iran, and other countries. Cuba, of course, Cuba has also provided very important help permanently in order to address the pandemic. And the Venezuelan public health system has been having very good results, 0.9% of mortality. And you can compare this with other figures from other countries and what you can see in terms of their performance. And but some international organizations choose not to acknowledge this, and they just chose to ignore what we are doing. And they did not take into consideration, for instance, when considering the Venezuelan situation, the fact that millions came back to our country. And this explains the increase in cases. We had to create, for instance, at the borders, some controls, but we did not close the borders during the pandemic because we wanted to receive our nationals during the pandemic. This is different from what other countries did. Just to give you one idea, we had over 300 cases that had finished this full cycle, but we could not accept Venezuelans not taken care of here in our territory, and we accepted them. We provided health care for all those Venezuelans. Of course, we had our sanitary policies, and we explained to them that they were going to remain in hospitals during 30 days, and they were going to receive free of cost medical treatment, and then they will be transported to their homes. So this is just to give you an example of the efforts that we have done in the midst of this warfare. And we have demonstrated that we abide by our principles, that our principles differ from the money principles. We try to do everything and take it into consideration, our principles in respect to the human rights. We have also been providing traditional medicine to our population. The president calls those medicines miracle drops. I don't know the exact name of that medicine, but we have been resorting to traditional medicine as well. Of course, we have had difficulties in ensuring access to health services, but in spite of these difficulties, you can see the results that we have achieved. In the midst of the neoliberalism, we have been able to defend our program, our policies, and this is fundamental to us. Look at what is happening in Brazil, in Manaus. We have just sent oxygen to Brazil to help them. It's not that we don't need that oxygen, but we know that our brothers from Brazil need it, and we provided assistance. And this is a country that has harbored military exercises from the US in order to put pressure on us, but we don't care about that. We just wanted to provide humanitarian assistance. I have two more questions regarding the transfer of resources being adopted as an indicator by the United Nations. The way in which we have been conducting all these programs is the following. We do not have a manual. We do not have a book, but we know is that we want to have a popular planning, and the challenges that we are facing is the indicators. The indicators, permanent indicators, we have very important indicators. We have more than 500 indicators in order to measure the economy's performance. But Commander Chavez, one of the things he wanted to achieve is that he wants all Venezuelans to participate in policies, in politics, so that we all be the subjects and actors of the planning from the neighborhoods, from the communities, to promote participation within all the communities. This is what President Chavez wanted to. If you go to a community, you will see that they have a charter, that they have a cartography, explaining their territory. They work with their problems, and this is what is important. And Venezuela has experienced with different policies, such as the indigenous policy, the planning under pressure. So we have been implemented several strategies. And the key point is to understand democracy on the basis of the 5 fundamental aspects for development that I explained earlier. Regarding indicators, well, it's a debate that we need to launch. But I would like to close by saying the following. Numbers, figures. All countries under war, subjected to a warfare, use all kinds of resorts. I mean, all resources are used against those countries that are under war. In the case of Venezuela, you can see the creation of a power powers. for instance, or parallel powers, parallel branches. You have the judiciary, the official judiciary branch, and you have the parallel judiciary branch that holds its sessions in Colombia or in Miami, for instance. Parallel executive instances were created as well. And parallel statistic institutions were also created by the opposition. They even created an institution for the electoral branch, a parallel electoral branch. These were NGOs that were financed and purchased by the opposition, and they were disseminating statistics of the aggression. And they even went to the lengths of publishing texts with false numbers. They claimed Venezuela was a regional distortion. And why? Because they needed to fabricate a distortion to go to the United Nations and denounce that distortion. So they made up all this. And they also claimed that with the price controls, we were distorting the economy, but any government has the authority or the power to take whatever economic measures it deems necessary. But they said that these were distortions, and they even invented names as though we were a scourge. And they even criticized the migrants. And what has President done in the face of this? Instead of launching a smearing campaign as the opposition did against the Venezuelan migrants, he just put in place a policy to welcome them back to our country. So what we need to do is to denounce this kind of acts, because they are creating false information. And I would like to ask those who work in universities, friends of us who are working in the universities, how would you think about a study on the food reality in Venezuela with using only a survey of 300 cases when we have 30 million inhabitants in Venezuela? Well, this is what they did. They did not take into consideration the population in different states. And then they claimed that that result was a nationwide result, taking into consideration only 300 cases. Well, this is what is happening here in Venezuela. So the numbers that you get from this fake information are being obtained through this kind of surveys. So this is a lack of respect to our institutions, because what has happened is quite different, but these figures are false and are just a reflection of the warfare against Venezuela. So we have the responsibility to defend the truth. It is true that we have difficulties. It is true that we are facing hardships, but it is true that our people is making huge efforts, and 7 years later, we're still standing and resisting. Thank you. The second round of questions now, right? Thanks to the minister once again. Of course, we received more questions and comments from participants, but I just wanted to make a couple of comments before I go to the questions. And one of the comments is the following. It is important to say that We have had a stable participation in the seminar, 2,000 people, and today we have had 4,000, more than 4,000 people following us. And the streaming channel in China, the channel is named Dibidili, and it is a channel that addresses the young population. So 4,600 people that are following today, they are students, they are professors, and are also associated to the militancy in China. And also people from South Africa, from Latin America, and from some regions of Asia, from Venezuela, are also following us. I also wanted to say, in terms of what the minister said regarding the systematization, this seminar is a contribution to the systematization of all the struggling processes in Venezuela. As we said at the beginning, we have been rebuilding one of the important social struggles in Venezuela at the rural and communal spheres, urban spheres as well. And as Jada said, the agreement between the organizations and platforms who are organizing this activity is to make available all these videos from all these sessions and to produce at the end a book of all the meetings that we held. And also through the chat, you can see, Kathy, there is one intervention that has to do with the Homeland plan, right? That could also support university students. I study at the university. I have read about the Homeland plan, but I have not had direct access to it. There is another comment on the traditional medicine of Venezuela, which is being practiced since the colonial times. According to some research on the traditional medicine, we do not have, like in China, a traditional medicine fully established in our health systems, but I think that this will be interesting. This is just a comment by a medicine student. And there was also another message from someone in Una Mujer, and he or she said that they were working in the systematization process of their data. Anyway, I'm going to check here in the chat and have a look at the full comment. Yes, the comment is, good morning. Here we are transmitting from the Experimental University Simon Rodriguez in Venezuela. We have started a systematization process on women data, on women platforms, on Una Mujer. This was just a comment. And another question from China. I would like to know how the Venezuelan people consider the struggles made by the political party in face of the economic sanctions. And is Venezuela working in technological development? This is another question. And through the streaming, we have also from China the following question. What do you make of the new US president who is being inaugurated today? Do you think that there is going to be a change in terms of the international policies adopted against Venezuela under Biden's administration? What are Venezuelans' plans for the development of the indigenous economies? And what kind of support can be given in this regard? So I would like to ask the minister to make his final remarks. Some days ago, some videos published, he corrects himself, to make some videos to see how China eradicated poverty. What kind of initiatives can be put in place in Venezuela can better illustrate the progress we have made in the Bolivarian Revolution? And the rest of the comments are just greetings, so there are no more questions. So I would like...
Gracias. Bueno, la ventaja es que cada pregunta es como un tema, ¿no? Mira, yo voy a tratar de primero saludar a todas las intervenciones, a todos los compañeros que han estado en esta...
Well, thank you very much. I would like to suggest for us to make an agenda with the different topics. That is my proposal, so that we can review each one of the topics. And I would propose the Simon Bolivar Institute to establish a thematic agenda, so that we can hold meetings and also invite actors, key actors, so that we can see what kind of dynamics are taking place in the reality without any kind of theorization. I'm just going to give you an example. In some Venezuelan villages, they have adopted sectorial plans. And the women's organizations also have implemented sectorial programs. The young also, they have developed their own plan. The elderly as well have adopted their own plans. So all these plans are considered as key sectors who are in close relation with the different fields of our society and economy. And in the different plans, we can see that there is a lot of dynamism in their approach, because for years they have been made invisible. For instance, in the case of the indigenous populations, they made original plans taking into consideration their own communities and native populations. Why do I say this? I say this because I would like to suggest you to evaluate different topics with the participation of special guests and key actors, so that we can look at what has been done in the sectorial plans and their concrete actions. The sectorial plans have a mandate given by the Homeland plan, and there are general and specific objectives. And each sector has to develop their own policies, their own programs and projects that are associated to those specific objectives. So the level of consultation is very important, and they have to reach certain indicators. In the indigenous populations, for instance, they have been working very hard in developing their communities, and they are addressing all these themes, such as education, health, housing. They have been successful in their plan. Also, in the case of Una Mujer, the women's organization, they also developed their sectorial plan, and they took into consideration several aspects such as agriculture, urban administration, etc. And of course, they have taken into consideration different aspects pertaining this exercise. So I just wanted to propose this in order for us to look at the sectorial plan. In case of the Central University, someone asked a question. There were a couple of comments of that. I think that the knowledge sector has more concrete demands that derive from, that stem from the Homeland Plan. We are experiencing a demographic bonus, and we will experience it until 2037. And universities have been operating according to their traditional approaches, but our approach is to massify education, which is one of the fundamental objectives. The quality of education in all the territory of our country. We have been created universities all over the territory. And also the specialization of education, which has been very important to us. Now you have a demographic bonus and you need to cover all the territory providing education. You have to give them training and you have to also cover the whole nation. As we have said, we have made preparations and we have asked to participate in the Educational Assembly. This is the second time that we go to the National Council of Universities in order to make this proposal, in order to also abide by the Homeland Plan. We have, of course, different plans and we need to respect diversity of universities, but we need to have a common approach while respecting the diversity that exists. The sectorial plan also could be implemented in the universities. We have started, but it has not been concluded. So it will be interesting to incorporate all the social movements, the grassroots, the scholar, in order to promote the sectorial plan within the universities. Plans are made by sectors. This is why they're called sectorial plans. They do not belong to a single institution or organization. They depend on the different sectors that are being formed. Now, allow me to say the following. A long time ago, we learned that we needed to ask for respect and that we needed to base our actions on our own decisions. We could not rely on someone else or on any kind of external agents. And we learned this lesson a while ago. And in terms of the communicational approach, I think the communications is a key sector of our revolution because we have put in place a policy in order to massify the revolutionary mass media. And President Chavez insisted on this on many occasions. Once the president told me that we needed to wage the battle for the truth of Venezuela, and this is what we have been doing. And I'd like to congratulate the Simon Bolivar Institute in this regard because they are also disseminating the truth about Venezuela, not only the truth about Chavistas, but the truth about Venezuela. Thank you very much.
Well, we thank the Minister of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, Ricardo Menendez, not only for his great presentation. As we said before, we were allowed to see what the Bolivarian revolution is like through its planning, but also through its specific facts by which the Bolivarian project is produced. And also, he showed the offensive and the latest years of attacks against Venezuela. In that sense, I would like to add a comment. Not as a chancellorship, but in the case of ALBA Movimientos, we have been thinking that many people say that maybe the new administration of Biden, he will take power today, might produce changes regarding the policies against Venezuela. I particularly believe that we would have to analyze in the upcoming days what will happen. Undoubtedly, there has been one change in one of the countries that used to recognize Juan Guaido, but now they are not recognizing him. So we would have to see what the reaction of the government of the USA will be. Certainly, we will have to check and see if the US government will stop recognizing that person. And in that case, how it is going to explain the confiscations, the different measures that they have applied, the decision regarding sit-go. We will have to see what the action is going to be by the government of the United States. They are battling today. They have a battle against China to try to sustain their hegemony. So in view of that situation, their need in the continent of having a homogeneity, I think that won't change. I say this because this has been a recurring debate point in each and every of the sessions of the seminar, and I believe that in this new round, it is also going to be an analysis. Now I would like to give the floor to our friend Kim Chi Lao for her to make some comments, so closure comments for this excellent session today. So Kimchi, we give you the floor.
Well, thank you very much. We would like to thank Yes, we would like to thank Professor Ricardo Menendez for the very detailed and very incisive analysis. And we are very happy that this second series has been opened with this excellent lecture. And we feel that it is necessary for dialogues to be continued, especially among the people's groups, people's movements. And in China, then many of us have been involved in the rural reconstruction movement, and it has been 20 years. So we have been also doing a review of the rural reconstruction movement in China. And we look forward to also collaborating on producing more publications, books in Spanish, English, and Chinese. And we hope that there would be more exchanges among the people of Venezuela and of China. And we will be continuing with this Venezuela series every Wednesday. But then next Wednesday, we are going to have a special session on the question of traditional medicines and indigenous ways. So please visit the Global University website for more details. And thank you again. So I would like to hand over to Jade.
Yes, apart from the webinar on traditional medicine and indigenous way, we also organize some webinars. For example, the on the people's plan for 21st century on the 26th of January, and we also have the attend the webinar on the ecology and on the 28th of January. And particularly, we also organize special sections on Zapatistas on the 29th of January. But in China, it means in the morning of the 30th of January. So we welcome all to join our webinars. And thank you again for all the audience. See you next Wednesday. Thank you.
Bueno, gracias a las compañeras. Quiero ratificar que además...
Thank you very much. I would like to ratify what Jade said. It has to do with the whole programming of activities, the University of Lingnan. They've been organizing several activities within the framework of the virtual forum, and they are inviting us to a debate about traditional medicine globally in this moment that we are confronting the pandemic as well as the capitalist crisis and the monopoly of pharmaceutical companies. So next Wednesday, we will have a debate where we will have the participation of some people from Venezuela, from urban communities, from Altos del Lídice, and also from indigenous communities like people from the Venezuelan Amazonia, and also some friends from Bolivia. There will be people from Africa, from Asia, from Europe. They will also participate and they will contribute to the debate. Next, I would like to close by inviting you to the following session. After that, we will be focused on one session that has to do with the imperialist blockade and the unilateral coercive measures. But another lecture that we will have will be focused on developing in detail each one of the different mechanisms that has to do with the offensive against the Venezuelan people. Once again, thank you very much. Thank you to all the participants that have followed us from Asia, from China, from Latin America, from Venezuela. We would like to thank Minister Ricardo Menendez for his participation. I would like to thank the whole team of the Planning Ministry who are here and who have made this possible. So we say goodbye to you. See you next Wednesday, and long live Chavez. Goodbye.